In the intricate world of Korean affairs, tailored intelligence makes all the difference. Korea Risk Group's consulting services offer specialized, actionable intelligence designed to guide your Korea-related decisions. We provide bespoke consulting services that cater to your unique challenges and goals. From policy analysis to market entry strategies, we bring clarity to complexity. Transform uncertainty into opportunity and visit koreapro.com solutions today. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News Podcast. I'm your host, Jacco Zwetsloot, and today it is Friday the 26th of December, Boxing Day, and I'm recording an episode all about sports and athletics in North Korea. And first-time guest here is Yong Ja Hong, who is a doctoral candidate in North Korean Society, Culture and Media at the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul. That's up in Samcheongdong, near the old Blue House. Her primary research area is DPRK Athletics, and she runs a YouTube channel which is at DPRK Athletics ENG for English, I presume, not for engineering, and a website, dprkathletics.com, which both of them aim to bring informed analysis of athletics in North Korea to a wider audience. Welcome on the show, Yong Ja.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a dream for me to be on this show, so I'm excited.
Okay, I'm glad that could come true today, on the day after Christmas, in fact, yeah. If you had to pick one sports moment that best explains how power works in North Korea, what would it be, and what does that moment reveal about who sport is really for in North Korea?
Oh, well, I would really have to choose the episode with Shin Geumdan. She was a middle distance runner, and she
well, just for those who are not sure, middle distance is how far?
We're talking like 1,000 meters, something like that, with hurdles and everything. She did a few different disciplines. So, yeah. And so she was an athlete in the early 60s. She was really one of the representatives of the Chollima era. She came out and she participated in the Ganifo Games, which was not the Olympics, but it was kind of an alternative Olympics organized by Indonesia to go against the Olympics, kind of provide something for nations that were like non-aligned and things like that.
How do you spell Ganifo, by the way? Putting you on the spot here.
Ganefo.
Okay, great, because I've never seen it in text before, so great, keep going.
And she set a world record at that. It's just a new record in world distance. And so she was really a top athlete. And so the DPRK actually got permission to participate in the Olympics in 1964 in Tokyo. They actually did the Winter Olympics early that year. I believe it was in a Nordic country somewhere. But in 64, they went to the Olympics, and Shin Geumdan was to participate. And so she could have been the DPRK's only gold medal winning athlete at these games. But right before the games, the Olympic Committee decided that anybody who had participated in Ganifo could not participate in the Olympics. So she was not allowed to participate, and she actually went all the way to Japan. They were ready to participate. The decision came down like right before the Olympics. And so it was just completely shut down by politics, and it gets better. Because
it was a political reason, was it?
I would say it was political because it was the Olympics wanting to shut down Ganifo. So it wasn't really, so it was, their decision to align themselves with Ganifo, I suppose, that shut her down. But what really gets better about it is that her father had actually fled south during the war, and she was raised with her mother in the north. And so she never got to meet her father, but her name was well known in the south because she was so successful. And a professor went out and found her father, and she said, okay, while they're at the Olympics, we need to arrange a meeting between the father and the daughter.
In Tokyo?
Yeah, in Tokyo, yeah. And they did it through the Cheonggan, actually. They used
the pro-North Korean Association of Korean Citizens in Japan.
Absolutely, yes. And so they were going to arrange the meeting, but then when the withdrawal was announced, then everything went haywire, and they only had a very short window of opportunity. But they managed to do it, and they had a meeting for 5 minutes. They met for 5 minutes. They never met again.
Wow.
I think Shin Geumdan is still alive, obviously. Her father has passed away at this point, but I think it's just kind of testament to the fact that no matter how good you are in the DPRK, no matter how successful an athlete, you're always victim to either international politics or internal political powers. And there's a great documentary about that. It's a Korean only. It was produced by KBS in the 80s. So I'd encourage anyone to look up that on YouTube if they're interested.
Wow, oh, what a story. And of course, reminiscent of the equally sad one-time only family reunion meetings in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, where people came together for a bit longer than 5 minutes. I think it was a couple of hours. Sometimes it was two meetings over 2 days. But at the end, they were always put back on the bus and never saw each other again, right?
Yeah, it's the same deal. Yeah.
So was Shin Geumdan's meeting with her father, I guess, the first in that? You may not know the answer to this, but the first of that kind of family reunions across the border?
Yeah, that's really not my area of expertise.
Great. Well, anyway, that's certainly a very sad vignette that shows that, politics really trumps ability in sport in North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And around North Korea, too, because as you mentioned there, there's a lot of backroom politics there in the international arena as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sport as statecraft. For newcomers, can you talk a little bit about how sport is positioned in North Korean ideology in terms of, mass participation, defense readiness, or elite medals, and how has that shifted, that emphasis shifted by era?
Well, I would say, it's a really big history, but I'll do my best to crunch it down. Basically, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was all about popularization. You have to remember that during the Japanese colonial era, sports really didn't come to the Korean peninsula until like 1900, and they came on a very small scale through missionaries in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get to the colonial era where the Japanese occupied the Korean peninsulas. Koreans living as second-class citizens, not many of them had the chance to participate in modern sport. If you look at the countryside, everybody was still playing traditional games, like they were doing shirum, the traditional Korean wrestling, things like that. And so then you get to the DPRK being established, and then you have this socialist philosophy coming in. So, the DPRK saying, like, all right, we've got to popularize sport for national defense and for working for labor and national defense is the two things. So you need to be strong to be a good worker, and you need to be strong to be a soldier. And that was the main point up until about the 1970s. And then in the 1970s, they get the opportunity to do the Olympics. They eventually went to the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, for the first time in 1972. And that was really the kickoff to put in elite athletics and kind of make athletics, because it was already popularized. And it's always been a big part of Korean society. Nowadays, when you're talking about the popularization of athletics, it's really not just labor and national defense. It's also taking the intellectuals who don't do any labor and giving them making them have a sense of collectivism for the society. And it's easier to do than making them go out in the fields and work in the fields in the summer. You just have them participate.
Do they do this by participating in sport or simply by watching and cheering?
Both.
Okay.
Everyone participates in sport. It's really a big society-wide thing, and they have tournaments in all levels. But really, from the 70s, 80s, 90s onward, Kim Jong Il was really the guy. Because Kim Il-sung, he didn't care that much about sport. He was really just a military man. But Kim Jong Il, he was really into sport. Everyone knows him for the propaganda and agitation department, the movies, the music. But really, he was also all about the sport. And from the 70s, 80s onward, he really pushed forward doing more different types of athletic disciplines and kind of pushing them into international games. And obviously, the 90s kind of crashed a little bit because of the arduous march. But then you get to the 2000s, 2010s, and then you have the late Kim Jong-il, early Kim Jong-un, just kind of another push to really push forth in athletic disciplines they know they can be good at. So we're talking like diving, wrestling, weightlifting, women's football, really mostly disciplines that really require a lot of just discipline, sheer discipline, not a lot of like advanced technique, but just that mental discipline and drive that can really be effective when you're doing, these sort of more classical disciplines. And that's what they win gold medals in. So that's kind of broad evolution of DPRK sport.
Thank you. That's great. That was like a whistle-stop tour, wasn't it? During the Cholima period in North Korea, what concrete policy levers did the state pull to mobilize people through athletics, and why did this matter beyond the gym?
Well, in I would say around 1959, 1960, that's when you had the collectivization of agriculture had basically been ended. You had the Cholima movement had basically started, so you're trying to organize everybody into work teams. You're really working, like you have the Taeanborn system, you have the Cheongsanri method. I'm getting too into the weeds here, but really the party was controlling everybody. It was direct party control of the factories. That was important, collectivizing the agriculture, getting rid of the private owners of land, making everything collectivized. And so the big important part of that was athletics, because athletics, one part of the society is factories. One part of the society is working in agriculture. So you have factories, agriculture, but athletics can be used in both cases. So it was really just saying that every factory over 1,000 people has to have an athletics team, and before work every day, you have to start doing calisthenics, exactly.
A bit like in South Korea during the Semmel movement, right?
Absolutely, you're right. I'm so glad you pointed that out. But then they say it's mandatory for every citizen. I mean, students, workers, teachers, just basically everybody was required to participate in athletics through a cabinet directive that was handed down in 1959.
Right.
So it was really just a society-wide push to do that, and I think that's what really sticks out about that era.
Does this also overlap with militarization of North Korean culture? I think of that because, again, the parallel in South Korea is I spoke to a former economic planner a few years ago, and he was remarking how easy it was for groups that had been together in units during the Vietnam War to then go and work in large infrastructure construction projects in the Middle East. They'd simply just moved as a unit and worked in a very militaristic style. And I wondered whether that discipline through the military also came through in the sports, or whether there was, I don't know, whether there was an overlap there.
I mean, I think sport discipline definitely has to do with the military. I mean, the military has always, since the times of the Korean War, they say that they founded the Korean military's athletic teams during the Korean War.
Right, because each military unit must have its own teams too, I guess. And like in America, they have Army-Navy games in North Korea.
Actually, they have the Army has the best teams in the country for the most part. I mean, I would say a majority of the teams, for example, in the elite football league, the DPRK Premier League, almost a majority of those teams are military associated teams. So, I mean, and not away from the elite sports, obviously the individual units, the Army units have their own games. They have they even have military related athletics. I would say from the 60s to the 70s, they really implemented military athletics. We're not talking like basketball, football. We're talking like grenade throwing, or like a radio thing, orienteering, or like marching. They're just a whole like obstacle course.
Yes.
So like all these military related athletics. It was kind of when the Korean peninsula got remilitarized in the 60s, when there was a little bit more tension.
Yes.
And I think ever since then, for a while, it was almost more important than regular athletics until you got to the 1970s.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, they all go hand in hand.
Yeah, big overlap there. All right, let's look at basketball for one sport in particular. So why did basketball, of all sports, become so symbolically important, touching leadership, image-making, diplomacy, and domestic policy? Maybe if you could give us one great story that connects the basketball court to the Politburo.
Oh, well, I would say that during the 1990s, Kim Jong Il was very personally interested in basketball. It's hard to say why. It was like because his son went to Switzerland, and then he wanted to take up the interest of his son? Was it because he started watching Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls? Yeah. It's really hard to say, because Bulls mania was huge back then, and because we could
in North Korea, or you mean globally?
Just globally.
Okay.
Because, they would get tapes from Japan, and it was big in Japan, or they might get tapes from China. It was huge in China. So that was how Kim Jong Il would basically kind of get interested in it. But I guess the important thing to know is that Kim Jong Il kind of pushed everything else aside and said, we must develop basketball right now. So, and this was
above other priorities.
Yeah, above other
sports priorities.
Yeah, I would say during the 97, 98, when you're going through the worst years of the arduous march, all of a sudden he pushes forth basketball. And I theorized as to like why he would do this. Was it just personal interest or whatever? But I think it was to kind of give them personal sense, or like a sense of victory, something to kind of cheer for when things are going so bad. And then it was eventually removed when Chong Song-ok, the marathon runner who won at the 1999 Marathon Games, won gold medal at the 1990 World Marathon Games. So from 96, 97, 98, Kim Jong-il was making, he was ordering every single high school had to have a basketball team. He was ordering every military unit needs to have a basketball team, ordering the construction of courts. He was writing directives, which I've not been able to find or get my hands on. I've just heard mentioned, where he was writing about how teams needed to strategize within basketball. So really, everything was about basketball. There were a bunch of propaganda about basketball. They made a movie about it. And you ask people, I've actually talked to some defectors about it, and I was like, do you remember how in the 90s it was all about basketball? And they were like, yeah, I was really confused. Why did we all of a sudden have to play basketball? And it was, so I would say it's kind of emblematic of how if there's a personal whim or they see some sort of kind of advantage out of it, that like the whole focus of the sport policy can change.
Yeah, and we're all aware of Kim Jong Un's love of basketball, but about Kim Jong Il, I wasn't aware of before. Although I am reminded that in that late 1990s era, there during the arduous march, there was that North Korean basketballer. I don't remember his name. You may. He was over 2 meters tall.
Oh,
and
yes.
There was talk of him maybe joining an NBA team and playing there, but I think there were some medical issues with him having received steroid injections to his knees, and that meant that he's he wasn't as healthy as you would want a basketballer to be. And there were also some North Korea problems around that too, right? Some diplomatic problems.
I would say it was really more diplomacy than I didn't hear that about his knees. I knew that he had some nutritional problems that they had to solve when because he went to Canada to train for a year, and they were able to kind of get him up. But really, it just came down to the State Department of the USA saying no because of these old Korean War era laws. But I mean, it was up to the point where there were senators in the United States saying that Ri Myung-hun needed to play. There were NBA coaches writing the State Department or whatever saying that we need to let him play, let him get drafted. And he would have been on a team. I mean, there were several teams interested, but it just never came to be because it was used as a political football. Basically, it's just like Shin Geumdan. It's another instance of no matter how good Ri Myung-hun is, it was really up to the whims of the NBA. It was up to the whims of Kim Jong Il. And at the end of the day, I think at the four-party talks, when they were doing that early nuclear negotiation, Ri Myung-hun's name was brought up, and the U.S. kind of used it as like a carrot, just kind of say like, maybe we'll let him play, if you give us some room in these negotiations. So he really just got turned into a political football, basically.
As a counterfactual, have you fantasized how things might have gone between the U.S. and North Korea if Ri Myung-hun had been allowed to play in the NBA?
Oh, absolutely. I think he could have been a cultural bridge because you have to think about Yao Ming in the 2000s. About
the Chinese player.
Yeah, and how it really created mutual understanding between cultures. It was a huge cultural victory for the U.S. because, NBA basketball became so popular over there, and then people in the U.S. saw a Chinese man and they kind of understood what it was. He wasn't kind of this communist robot, which you would have thought in the 80s and 90s. So it would, I don't know if it would have changed the world, but I think it could have been a really important political bridge and then maybe changed some minds in Congress when they were defunding the whole, they had the Geneva Agreement going on, but then it was defunded a little bit by Republicans in Congress. And you think, well, maybe if you pie in the sky, but maybe if Ri Myung-hun had been able to play, then maybe they would have not defunded that and things could have been totally different, but it's really, I just wish it had happened.
Yeah. Now, in your research, you break down North Korean sport and basketball into distinct eras. You've already mentioned a couple of them in a previous question. What were the inflection points where basketball clearly moved up or down the priority list? You've already mentioned when Kim Jong Il in the arduous march, but were there other times when it went down in priority?
I would say that during it was actually 1940s, Pyongyang was, I think during the colonial era, during the Japanese era, Pyongyang was really well known for its ball sports, not only football, but also basketball. They were really successful. And that transferred over into early DPRK. So they had a team that they sent to the World Festival of Youth and Students, which I know you're very familiar with.
Yes.
But the one back then in Hungary in 1947. And their team actually won the whole competition. It was more minor teams. They weren't really facing like high-end national teams. It was kind of like club things at that time. But they were really actually very good. And they used, this is an aside, but I have to mention it. They were, what's so interesting about that team is that at the time, nobody used jump shots in basketball. Like everybody just stood on the floor and shot. And no one jumped. It was really just stand. I would, if you're interested, just look at a game of basketball in the 40s. It's very stagnant, kind of boring to watch. But the North Korean team, they used jump shots. They used jump passes, which they don't use today. Nobody jump passes today. So they were using all these strange, innovative techniques. And there was a man interviewed who played for one of the opposing teams. Yeah. And he said, we had never seen a jump shot before. We'd never seen a jump pass. And you have to wonder, where did they get these innovative techniques? And that's one of those things that's going to be gone to the sands of time because everybody's related is dead. But so anyway, from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s, I would say it was important because the DPRK felt that they had a chance of winning, especially after what happened in the 40s. That really kind of motivated them to put emphasis behind basketball, create one of the first athletic teams, I think for the Nemusong. I forgot what that is in English.
Oh, the Interior Ministry?
Yeah. The first DPRK basketball team was created from that 1947 team, and them along with the football team were the first two teams in the DPRK. So that it was kind of a high priority in the 50s and 60s. They went abroad a lot. There were actually exchanges with some really famous teams in the Soviet Union, like Žalgiris Kaunas, which is in Lithuania. And they had, I think, some exchanges with France team as well. And there was just a lot of back and forth. But I think by the time you got to the 70s, they really started to realize that they couldn't win. And also basketball was really important because at that time, women also played basketball. Women weren't playing football until the 80s. So the women team also went abroad. And so it was kind of important, but I think it kind of decreased in importance in the 70s and 80s because they didn't see it as a discipline in which they could win. And so then they're like, all right, push this to the side. But then, as you mentioned, Ri Myung-hun comes, and you've got this giant superstar who, is winning MVP at Asian-wide tournaments and things like that. And then Kim Jong Il's personal interest rises back up to the top. And now it's totally gone. I mean, basketball is still popular among the populace. There's still games, but they haven't sent their men's team abroad since 2011.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though Kim Jong-un invited Dennis Rodman to come several times, and then they had the Harlem Globetrotters, and they played an exhibition match, etc., but it didn't really translate into a repopularization of basketball. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think, because Kim Jong-un is more interested in football, quite frankly. He goes to football games more often. And I think that at that time, it was really more of a personal interest thing for him. I think that the whole thing with that negotiation, and I think that you were going to ask me about it at some point, was that Dennis Rodman was not important enough of an NBA player to really bring some of his comrades, some of his teammates that were actually very good that would have made for a high-profile game that Kim Jong-un wanted. But, the DPRK team, they were just too bad. They were bringing in old retired players, and I mean more so than Dennis Rodman's personal flubs. That's why it wasn't really able to gain any sort of political traction at that time. So I think that because that thing kind of failed, and because they wanted to kind of put their policies in other sports, which they thought they could actually win, because they quickly understood that basketball wasn't a sport that they could win in internationally. So it's still popular, at the grassroots level, but I mean, at the higher level, it's just not so popular anymore.
Interesting. And what have inter-Korean unity basketball episodes actually achieved beyond optics? Are there any measurable spillovers into federations, youth programs, or club play?
I'd say the biggest thing was Jung Do-young, the former chairman of Hyundai Asan, who he was the guy who famously he stole a cow when he's from the DPRK. Then he stole a cow. He brought the cows back. He did a lot of trips to the DPRK. And Jung Do-young, he actually was able to construct a gymnasium or a huge stadium actually there in Pyongyang. So if you go to Pyongyang, there is still a Ryugyong Jung Do-young Gyeonggijang or Longgujang. So there's a stadium named after him.
It's named after him. They kept that name. I wonder in the era of post-unification talk whether they may have renamed that along with a lot of other things.
But anyway, that's a good question. Go on. Yeah, that's a good question. But he was actually very, personally interested in basketball. He owns 2 basketball teams here. There's stories of him walking out in the snow to cheer on his a team at a local gym. Just the guy was very very personally interested in basketball. So that's why he kind of drove those 1999. 2003 unification games between the North and the South. And then I think sadly, just because there wasn't enough momentum to kind of keep it going on a regular basis, that it just kind of fizzled out and not really a lot came from it. I mean, you still had a little bit in 2018 when there was the rapprochement during the Moon Jae-in era. And you even had a unified women's team that played in the 2019 Asian Games and got a silver medal. But really, I think what might symbolize it is that how you had the 2023 Asian Games. You had team DPRK women's basketball players, ROK women's basketball players. They played on the same team 4 years before, but because the DPRK government says you can't talk to the people from the South, they weren't even able to communicate. So it really all went downhill. I still do believe in sports diplomacy, but you've got to have more consistency. You've got to have a consistent exchange if you really want to make any political progress.
Yeah, and I'm just guessing here. I'm guessing sports diplomacy can't take the lead, right? Like it can be there as a buttress or a support or something, but it can't really be out front, can it, with North Korea?
I think, I think the politics have to be there first for it to happen, but it can be one of the first things that you do. So it's just as long as the environment and rapprochement is there, first you have the meeting between the high-end leaders, and then that's one of the first steps towards really real cooperation, reconciliation.
It sounds like there's potential for at least one Netflix documentary on North Korean basketball. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Now, let's move on to baseball and softball. You, in your research, have charted several cycles of introduction and abolition for baseball and softball. Why does the North Korean state keep revisiting these sports, and why did baseball end again around 2016? And what does that tell us about policy incentives and resource allocation?
Oh, well, baseball is a really intriguing story because you have to think during the colonial era, when the Japanese occupied Korea, the baseball was really popular amongst Japanese people living in Korea, but it was not that popular amongst Koreans. I would say that.
I always thought that it was popularized first by the YMCA here, particularly in Pyongyang.
Yes.
Maybe more so than Seoul, but go on.
Oh, no. In Seoul, P.L. Gillette was kind of the forerunner. He was the first person to introduce baseball to the DPRK. He was a missionary for the YMCA.
Right.
And that happened here first in Seoul, but then one of his first tours went into the north. There were Korean teams playing baseball. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
I mean, it's just that they were elites only. I would say a very small percentage of the population. Football was really popular, but baseball was really dominated by Japanese teams because if you think about it, you need the bats, you need the balls, you need all of this equipment, you need all of this money, you need to know all of these rules. It's not so simple. And so it was just hard to get popularized. And so then in 1946, 1947, the DPRK starts playing baseball like a little bit because the infrastructure was already there. But then, the Soviet government comes in, the new policy priorities of making sport for everybody, not just the elite. Baseball just disappeared. We don't know why it disappeared. I mean, there were games played, and then all of a sudden there's no mention of it after 1947. And the reason it came back was because of the Cheongneon in 1959, because in 1959, that was when the first repatriations of the Cheongneon coming.
Part of the Paradise on Earth campaign.
Yeah. And so they come in to the DPRK, and they've been playing baseball their whole lives.
Right.
They're fans of it. Even a former pro, a Nippon professional baseball player, actually was one of the repatriates to the DPRK.
Wow. And
so they played on a low level at like technical high schools. There were a couple of higher level teams, like Kikwancha, the team of the Ministry of Transportation, had a baseball team at the time. And then they have a really good relationship with Cuba, and they do a lot of not just baseball, but also football and other cultural exchanges with Cuba in the 60s. And so that's what really drove them to kind of keep baseball on a low level. But then it just disappears again. And I think later towards the 70s, as those repatriates start to age, because the vast majority of them came in the early 60s, and it just didn't get transferred. And so it just kind of disappeared. But then Kim Jong Il comes in the 1980s, and he's like, we need to try new sports. We need to do new things. And so then baseball and softball all of a sudden get redistributed. But the issue was they're playing against teams that have such big, long baseball traditions. And you're trying to get people who are picking up baseball as adults to be competitive in international competition. It's not going to happen. And so it just continued kind of as this zombie for a really long time. Like the men's team went abroad only a couple times in the early 90s. The women's team continued to go abroad up until I think the mid 2000s. The softball team, and there were only a couple of teams. There would be like a domestic league, but there would just be 2 or 3 teams playing against each other constantly on one field. And so it was just like eventually, I assume that in the 2006, there's no corroborating reports, but all you can do is assume that they just gave it up because it was just like we're not going to win at this internationally. There's no real popularity for this domestically, and they just didn't push it out far enough, and people are always picking up the game too late because they wouldn't start playing until they were 12, 13 years old. So I think what it really says is that sports get introduced and abolished kind of in accordance with what the leadership wants, but also in accordance with what the international flavor is at the time. I think a lot of women's sports, like women's softball, started because there was more of an international space for them to play in. So it's really all in accordance with the leadership's wants, and then the international environment, and then the viability of doing it nationwide, because equipment is hard to get, and they would have to learn how to manufacture it and everything like that.
So is there anything left at the moment? Is there baseball or softball happening in North Korea right now?
The absolute last mention I've seen in any state media, in all of the sporting journals that I've gone through, was 2016. I believe I mean, the NK News, there's a report about how the baseball stadium in Pyongyang was raised over. They still played a lot in Nampo. It was basically just an empty dirt field. But baseball, softball completely disappeared from the record books. I mean, my records are incomplete, so I can still be proven wrong. But yeah.
I do recall in the last year or two talking to somebody, and I forget now who it was, that on a satellite photograph spotted what looked to be a perfect baseball diamond somewhere way outside of Pyongyang, like up in the northeast. And but we weren't able to find out more about that at the time.
Yeah, I know that they play in Nampo, and I think that they may play there as well. But I mean, really, all you need is a field. You can easily convert a football field to be a baseball field as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
How much did material constraints kill baseball? You know that there's high equipment demand. You've already mentioned the bats and the balls and the helmets, etc., compared with football or volleyball. And, of course, land use pressures that make dedicating flat space hard in North Korea. What did that mean in practice for schools and work unit clubs?
I think, I think that the land use issue was always, I think that was also, the land use issue was important in the 40s as well. I mean, that's probably why they gave it up, because they're like, we need to use this for football or basketball or volleyball, because it takes up so much land. And actually, when I met with a man from the Cheongryun, he was talking about what he knew about sport in the DPRK, and he said, yeah, I mean, baseball requires a lot of land. So I think that land use is a huge thing, as well as, we know that the DPRK reclaims land, like that just from the sea constantly, because they need more of it. And then also the equipment is also an issue. I think that sanctions don't affect the sporting equipment economy as much as we think, because they have a lot of domestic producers. There are actually several different competing companies producing athletics equipment, but then they would really need an incentive to do it. And I think that the material constraints are one part of it, but then also there needs to be kind of this political organizational capital that would really push it out, because people don't just kind of play baseball on their own. You kind of have to, nobody really does sport on their own. It's all like organized, right? So you need to kind of have more organizations pushing it in. And as it was, I mean, people were picking it up at the age of 12. So it was just, the popularity wasn't there.
How feasible is it to have a single field used for multiple sports?
I'd say it's very feasible. I think that with baseball, in international standard, you have to have a mound, right? So you have to kind of construct a mound in the middle of the field, and that would be troublesome. But from what I've seen of pictures of them playing baseball, they just didn't bother with that. They just pitched on flat land. So it's very viable. From the beginning of the DPRK, they were always very adamant on, don't just play football on this field. We need to have this field for football, also baseball, also basketball, also baseball, or just whatever. And they play basketball outside, basically on dirt courts a lot of the time. So really, they are experts at it, and they definitely do that.
Now, I understand that the president of World Baseball, Ricardo Fraccari, went and observed a baseball demo in Pyongyang. When was that, and what was the result or the outcome of that?
Oh, I believe that was a couple of months ago. And, it was all very tight-lipped. I mean, he didn't really say anything about it.
But well after 2016, though.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
But he went there just to discuss Baseball 5, which is this new variant on baseball.
Is this a low infrastructure variant, is it?
Yes.
A smaller field?
Yeah, it can also be indoors. I think mostly when I've seen it played, it's not on a field. It's almost like on a court, like a basketball court, outdoors, or indoors. It comes from Latin America. It's like 5-person baseball. There's no bats. You use kind of this small rubber ball and you throw it, and you kind of like run around the bases. It's kind of like a schoolyard game almost.
Okay.
And so like Cuba is very good at it, for example. And
so less equipment's needed.
Yes. And so it's viable to do, but it's like, do they have the incentive to do that? Do they want to be really good at Baseball 5 internationally? They did do a demonstration game for Ricardo Fraccari.
Right.
So
is he pushing that? Is he? I mean, I imagine he might be favored, traditional baseball, but is he interested in Baseball 5 in North Korea?
Oh, I'm sure he would be.
Okay.
I mean, I think that what the DPRK is really looking for, though, is funding. Because, for example, hockey, women's ice hockey and men's ice hockey, the DPRK plays it only because, and sends teams internationally, only because the International Ice Hockey Federation pays for them to go.
That makes sense, because that is a very equipment-heavy sport.
Yeah, and they're not good at it. And so, even though they're not good at it, they'll go if they're paid to go. Whereas, at the basketball team, the FIBA is not going to pay for their basketball team to go. So they don't send their men's basketball team abroad. So if Ricardo Fraccari was willing to pay for the Baseball 5 team to travel to international competitions, the DPRK would be all over it. But as it is, I think that the prestige is too low. I think that the prestige of the sport would have to be higher for them to have a real interest in it.
Are there any internal policy signals in the DPRK that would tell you that it's being genuinely adopted?
No, I've not seen any news of it outside of that. And they really do have a lot of news reports about new variants of sport. If you just watch KCTV, sometimes they'll have a really short documentary like, oh, here's this new sport they invented. And, but as far as how much do they adopt these new sports, there's really nothing about Baseball 5 that I've seen outside of that meeting.
Now, I want to talk a bit about women in sports in North Korea. So in DPRK Film and TV About Sport, you show female athletes gaining more decision power over 2 decades, yet still bounded by propaganda rules. So what changed on screen and what stayed rigid underneath?
Well, I would say, the female athlete, I think during the Kim Jong Il era, you had female athletes who were very much, it was almost like a stage play. It was very stilted. It was very structured. But it wasn't there wasn't a lot of humanity to it. And I mean, there was humanity, obviously. I mean, there were some great writers. There were some great films. But it just in the characters, they would act like they were on a stage play rather than kind of acting naturally. And then as they pick up that, influence from Chinese dramas or ROK dramas, and they kind of reset their whole film industry in the 2010s, they almost shut it down, and then they start it back up on a small scale. They focus more on TV dramas. You see characters become a lot more human, and that's so true for the sporting athletes as well. So during the Kim Jong Il era, you have these women athletes who are super submissive. They're only going to follow what the male authority figure says in their life, or or what the party says that they're supposed to do. They're going to commit ultimate sacrifices. But
just to clarify for our listeners, we're talking about actresses playing athletes, right? So these are not the athletes themselves.
No, they're at the athlete. Well, they're how they're portrayed in the film.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's kind of like
so they're portraying real life North Korean athletes on film.
Yes,
right.
Yes. It's always based on a real. I mean, not all, but in all of these cases I'm talking about, it's based on real historical athletes, kind of based on their stories.
Any dramas made about Shin Geumdan?
Shin Geumdan? No, I wish. Only that ROK documentary that I've mentioned. But the ones there are the marathon runner who won the 1999 World Championship marathon, the only kind of world championship won by a DPRK track and field athlete. There was also the table tennis player Baek Young-sun, who won the table tennis championships, I believe, in 1976 and 1977. And then also about DPRK women's football team, one of the first ones to win one of the lower tier world championships. So it was about all of them. But really, these women, as you get to the 2020s, I think anybody who has any kind of interest in DPRK film at all and speaks Korean, because it's unfortunately not subtitled, Majimak Han-al, or The Last Ball, is a fantastic 5-part documentary series about the table tennis player I just mentioned. And you see it was made in 2022, I believe, and it's just so viscerally, she's really willing to kind of challenge and take things into her own hands. Obviously, she's still under the broad propaganda strokes, but kind of in her personal life and how she's portrayed, it's a lot more human, it's a lot more believable, and she's allowed to challenge authority to a certain extent. And obviously, even though in the end she gets pushed back to collectivism, she still has a little bit more wiggle room and is just portrayed so much more realistically. So I think that that's kind of the trend that we're seeing in order to kind of keep people interested. Because if you keep making these same stilted things about people who are totally submissive, then it's not going to have any mass appeal. Yeah.
So these shifts in the media portrayal, are you able to link that to anything actually in the sport, in the world of sport itself? Do women women athletes seem to have a greater agency now than they did in previous decades?
I mean, it's obviously not done in a vacuum. I would say that definitely, you have film like Bend It Like Beckham was very popular and broadcast on DPRK TV. And that's a film where you have very independent women football athletes kind of portrayed upon the screen. So obviously, I think that has to have some sort of an effect, kind of the international movement of how we have more women's sports, the diversification of women's sports, the, greater independence and liberation of women, just broader, worldwide international feminism definitely had an effect. I mean, they wouldn't be playing women's sport in many categories at all if it weren't for the development of that internationally. So,
are there women boxers or other wrestlers in North Korea?
Oh yes, definitely.
Okay. It's interesting because I remember, one of my fascinations is North Korean comic books, and one from 1990, volume one of A Sick and Twisted World, shows a lot of vignettes about how awful the world is, and especially South Korea. And one of those stories was about South Korean female boxers, and look at this. Here's an example of what a sick and twisted society South Korea is, that they allow women to box there. And it's interesting now that North Korean women are allowed to box too. So maybe they don't circulate that comic book anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they're winning gold medals internationally. They're boxers, actually. So I mean, but they didn't start doing that until the 80s and 90s. That was all the reform of Kim Jong Il, where the women started to wrestle and box. It was, if you look at any book from the 60s, 70s, they're going to say that, like you said, absolutely abhorrent. I mean, it's not, but that's what they said. Yeah.
Now, walk us through, moving to sort of the pathway to the world of sport, from schoolyards to national teams. Walk us through a North Korean student's pathway in sport today. They presumably get some physical education at school. They'd be joining a local club, and would they be scouted? How does that work? Where are the choke points and the accelerators in that pathway?
So you start, I mean, you could be, if you are an elite athlete, you could be from anywhere. Obviously, if you're in Pyongyang, maybe you have a little bit more access to better equipment. But fundamentally, everybody goes to primary school, elementary school, Seoul Hakgyo, and they go there until they're 12 years old. And there are a variety of sports offered there, generally the more popular ones. And that's where you'll have your first team. And you will be picked, or you will be selected when you get to be, so like for a ball sport like football, basketball, whatever, that will be around the age of 12. But for like gymnastics, that will be around like the age of 6 or 7. So it really depends on the sport. And you get selected, and then you go to a boarding school. There are boarding schools basically in most cities, in most provinces. And you go to these boarding schools, and you basically become a full-time athlete. You attend maybe something like a third of the normal classes, and you really just focus on your athletic career. There are regular checks to make sure that you're meeting all of your athletic standards, and then if you don't meet it, you're just sent out and back into the regular school. And this continues on until you're about 18 years old. And I should say that in ROK, there's a similar system here where a lot of people will enter elite schools, or just around the world. Nowadays, there's sports. They've always had these sport academies. I think since like the 70s, they've had these dedicated boarding schools for kids aged 12 to 18. But now in each province, they're making specific schools for football. So the football used to be part of that broader school, but now football athletes all go to their own school, which was started by Pyongyang International Football School in 2014. So anyway, normal. So if you're an athlete, you're from birth to like 12 years old, or like from 5 to 12 years old, primary school, you're just in the normal school. Then from 12 to 18, you play at the elite boarding school. Then when you're 18, if you're good enough, you go to a athletics team, and you play on the athletics team generally from the time you're about 18, 19 until you're about 26. When you retire, usually isn't up to you unless you're super elite. It really depends on whether you're meeting standards and whether the team wants to continue funding you. And sometimes you might go to university and then go to a team, but it's rare. Or you might go from a normal school to an athletics team, but there's usually like a bribe involved in that, from what I've heard from defector accounts. But basically, once you go to the athletics team, again, it's really strict. You have to meet checks. You're basically living in another boarding school and like living in the team facilities. And then once you retire, you basically and of course, there's a university that has, if you go to like Joseon Cheuk Hakgyo or something like that, there's a Joseon Athletics University. So athletes might go there as well, or elite athletes might go to Kim Il-sung University. They have a really strong athletics team that actually competes with the normal athletics team. So it's almost like its own thing. So basically, once you get done, you retire around the age of 26, and you have to fall back on something else. So you have to kind of basically change your profession. I mean, if you were an elite athlete, you might have access to a better political career. But if you're just normal, you might end up having to work in the local office or the factory or whatever.
Has North Korea gone through any international doping scandals in the same way that East Germany did back in the 80s?
No, but it's interesting because before all that doping stuff came out, Kim Jong Il in the 80s was making speeches about we need to look to East Germany, because very famously, they punched so far above their weight because of the doping scandal. I mean, they were getting like third most medals in the Olympics, even though they're this tiny half of a country. And the DPRK was like, we need some of that. How can we follow this? In the 80s, they were pushing for it, but nothing ever really came of it. They have had some doping scandals, but I think that It's not any more than a country like Russia would have. It's not like super egregious. And if you actually look at athletic journals and you look in them, they have articles about like, okay, new doping regulations are coming out. This is what we're going to have to start testing for. And over the past 10 years, these descriptions of doping have gotten more and more sophisticated. So you really think that they are playing by the rules as much as they see necessary. And there's propaganda about following the rules and not doping. I mean, I'm not going to say doping doesn't go on. It definitely does go on to some extent. I think that that's true of a lot of other countries, though, as well. And I think it really comes down to kind of the individual level of corruption of the individual, or whether they think they could get around X, Y, or Z, type of thing.
Now, in the era of COVID, North Korea shut down everything, and nobody was coming or entering the country, and that really put a halt to all international competition for several years there. And of course, sanctions that still exist from the United Nations and other organizations that don't help. So, where are we? Where's North Korea now in terms of international competition? Has it fully recovered, and what metrics do you watch to gauge recovery or perhaps further retreat?
I think that the COVID situation, it really did shut down athletics. I think that the main effect it had was that a lot of young athletes who might have been really good at that time, for about 3 years, they weren't able to go abroad. So you could have had the prime of your career cut, basically.
Right.
But once they came out of COVID, they came out of COVID storming. I tell you what, they've won so many medals since then. It's almost like they were I'm thinking of Dragon Ball Z, where they were in a hyperbolic time chamber or something. They were just somehow the being in the isolated environment helped them to be good or something. But ever since then, I mean, they didn't really participate in the 2014 Paris Olympic, basically because they weren't able to participate in a lot of what the preliminary competitions that would have raised their profile enough to like qualify for the events. But after that, I mean, in the Asian Games, they're still winning a lot of medals. Their women's football team is doing amazingly. I mean, their under-17 team just scorched the entire world competition. I mean, there was nobody even close to them as they just pranced to a gold medal. So like really, I think that all of that effect is basically gone. I would say that, but if you want to look at like how the DPRK is going to do in the future, you really just kind of have to see what athletic events they're going to, how many medals they're winning, how many teams are being allowed to go abroad. Is it just the disciplines they're winning at, or are they going for more disciplines? And are domestic club teams going abroad as well, not just the national teams? So
give us the top 3 sports to watch North Korea in.
Well, I mean, are we talking about, are they going to win, or is it entertaining?
Okay, let's stick with entertaining for now.
Oh, entertaining. Let's see. Women's football. Watching any DPRK women's football team. I actually traveled to see their club team, which is their only business-based team, Jacco Zwetsloot, play an international play in Laos and Myanmar recently. And they're very fun to watch. They're a very competitive team, or any of their lower-level women's national football teams. And then I would also say that diving, I think if you can get into diving, their diving athletes are very good, and they are coming up to be one of the best nations in the world in diving. And then these disciplines aren't necessarily very fun to watch in my view, but I think a lot of other people watch them, like weightlifting or wrestling. These two disciplines, they are world elites in, or if you're into Taekwondo, of course, they are going to be one of the world's best teams in Taekwondo. So that about covers it. But I mean, it really just depends on what sport you want. I have a friend of mine who's a huge fan of DPRK women's ice hockey, and he goes out to see their team every year as they travel usually to Europe. And even though they're really bad, he really enjoys going and watching the game. So it just depends on what you like, Now,
in your Cholima analysis, you talk about how athletics help to cement mass mobilization and later nationalism. If Pyongyang tried to re-Cholima sport today, what policy ingredients would we recognize, and would they still work?
Re-Cholima sport, I think it's kind of hard to define what that is, because, I mean, back in the day, it was really about popularizing sport. It was about motivating workers to work harder. Whereas like today, you don't necessarily need as much like physical labor as you did back in the day, because there's machinery. I mean, obviously there's sanctions, things like that make it that you have to do a lot more physical work, but really there's a lot more intelligentsia. There's a lot more office workers nowadays. So I would say the main thing would be keeping office workers doing athletic competitions in order to increase their sense of collectivism, like I was mentioning earlier. I think that would kind of be kind of continuing the spirit of Cholima. But I don't think that there's kind of a need to like reinvigorate the spirit of Cholima because it accomplished its mission, and there's not really kind of a modern equivalent need for it.
How does North Korea do in marathon running, both men's and women's? I'm thinking about that because of the annual tours to participate in the Pyongyang International Marathon, which is run coincidentally on the same day as North Korea's own domestic marathon. But the serious runners start earlier, and the foreigners who are just there for a bit of fun, they get let go later.
Yeah, well, in 1999, aside from that World Championship, and then aside from Shin Geumdan, who I've also mentioned, there really haven't. Oh, and then there was someone who won a marathon, I think, in Czechoslovakia in the 80s. There was a man who they made a film about him as well. But there, Jolsona Daryora, he was actually made by the kidnapped director Shin Sang-ok. Yeah, it was made by his film studio. Very, very good film. But basically, they aren't very good. They usually, way back in the pack, they'll usually send one or two athletes, but they will just not be competitive. So they're not elite in that category by any means.
Okay, interesting, because they obviously do devote a lot of resources to it. I mean, certainly there are a lot more North Korean runners than there are foreign runners on the day of the marathon in April each year. So there's a lot of them. Presumably they're going, they're being trained at school or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more about mass athletics, kind of bringing it out to the people,
Lastly, are there any widespread myths about North Korean sport that your research contradicts?
Well, it's not out right now, but I'm working very hard on my master's thesis. I mean, not doctoral thesis, being a total shut-in right now. But I'm reading a lot about the football. And I think that if you read a lot about what's written about football on the internet, it's so wrong. I think that the main misconception people have is I've seen people, especially here in the ROK, say that they don't have a league. I've had people like legitimately who know football really well, and they say, "Oh, DPRK doesn't have a league," and I'm like, "Of course they have a league," or they'll.
And I think some of those matches are actually played at the Pyongyang Stadium on the day of the marathon because while we're out there running,
really,
they have to keep all the spectators in the crowd in the stadium entertained. They have a football match or perhaps two. While the marathon's being run, so otherwise people wouldn't stay there, I imagine.
That's fantastic. You're teaching me. I never knew that, but that's really cool. You're right. They play a lot of the matches there. I think the one thing to understand is that all of the teams are in Pyongyang. All of the elite teams are in Pyongyang. The vast majority of them, 99%, are attached to a sort of higher ministry. So most of them are military. So like Kalmegi is Navy, Chebi is like Air Force. But then you also have the 25th April team, which is the team created by Kim Jong Il in the 70s. You have they're all under some sort of ministry. Kikwancha. I mean, I just don't need to go on. But like they all are attached to one ministry or another. And if you look online, a lot of people will say like, oh, well, this team has their home stadium is in like Hamhung, or their home stadium's in Sinuiju. This is totally false. They're all in Pyongyang, and they kind of the league will kind of travel around the country to kind of show the teams to like the outer regions. But really, in the outer regions, you don't have any elite sports teams. You will have like a provincial-wide sports team and a city-wide sports team that are kind of managed by the local and people's committees, but you won't have any sort of high-end football team. So I think that if you
Is that because anyone who's really good eventually just gets sent to Pyongyang?
Yes. Right. So they call it like going to the center, I think, in Korean.
So if you're a provincial sports manager, director, it must be kind of crushing that every time somebody comes up from nothing and you watch them get sent to the center and you stay there in Hamhung or wherever you are.
It's funny because that was in a novel I read called Molchengi, there was a conflict about that where there was actually a local sports team manager who had all of his good athletes sent to the center, so his team was always losing, and then he eventually quit his job. Because, I mean, in the story, he quit his job, and then he went to work at a local construction site because he's like, oh, I must be a terrible manager. Right. Then one of his athletes, because he's internationally famous, comes back home, and he's like, we need to get this guy back coaching football again. I don't know whether it's true or not, but this is definitely a conflict. Or you might have, there were actually, I think in Ronggu Kamdok, a story about a basketball manager, there was a local manager who actually wanted to keep his athlete for the team and didn't make the sacrifice for the greater nation by sending them to one of the central teams. So that is definitely a big issue in the DPRK.
So I guess my big takeaway is that sports and elite sports in North Korea, it's very centralized, right? It's
Yes.
very it's top down, it's government run, and it's Pyongyang centric.
Yes, 100% correct.
There you go. Thank you very much. I'm going to once again plug your YouTube channel at DPRK Athletics ENG and also the website dprkathletics.com. Any final thought to leave us with, Yong Ja?
No, it's been fantastic having you here, and it's been fantastic being here. And if anybody's interested in my work, go to those two. I've got a lot of lectures about my work out on my YouTube channel. I've also got some travel logs that I do to go see DPRK Athletics, and I do have a couple of documentaries. So feel free to stop by. Feel free to hit me up if you know about a great postdoc position for me to take, or if you just want to talk about DPRK Athletics, email me at hyj1991@proton.me. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, good luck with that PhD. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Score more for less with our NK News Shop discount campaign. Ready to upgrade your wardrobe with some unique flair? At the NK News Shop, podcast listeners buying any 2 items from our t-shirt or hoodie collections will snag their third for half off. Whether you're eyeing our North Korea-themed gear for yourself or as gifts, now is the perfect time to act. Don't miss out. Head to shop.nknews.org and make the most of this limited time offer. That's shop.nknews.org. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alana Hill for facilitating this episode, and to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.